Start recording. I'm gonna go full screen and then we begin, ladies and gentlemen. Okay.
Almost all this lighting is bad.
What is bad? The Wi-Fi.
Lighting.
Oh well. Don't worry about the lighting. Anyway, welcome everyone to another podcast episode of the video game mechanics. We are going to be analyzing another one here, talk about a little bit about its history, how it's been used, how it's been innovated, and also where it stands today. I am joined again by a few regular faces, return by none other than the Sidcrackers there below my face, the broad-shouldered athlete you see there. The loading screen to my right here is Mr. Marty, my cousin, because I think his camera is loading.
Loading screen.
There. And the Mothman that looks kind of like Kanye West down there will be slow. So yes, welcome to our fellow guests. Oh, that's a freaking keyboard. I was so confused there for a second. Good intro. Anyway, so yes, we are talking about boss fights today, which, the big boss, the end level threat, that thing you always as a kid were shaping up towards, I'm going to face the big boss is such a defining moment in a lot of games, probably from your childhood as well, because most of your memories are just defeating this big boss and stuff, and it has such a significant impact because it's one of those topics in games that it went so popular, it's literally in pop culture everywhere now. You can talk about boss fights to even non-gamers and they'll know what you're talking about. You don't get to talk about, let's say, strafing or drop shots or kind of stuff gaming terms like that to anyone that's not a non-gamer because they wouldn't understand. But if you say boss fight, everyone knows what's a boss fight, and that's because of video games. So that's kind of one of those pop culture phenomenon ones, but it has a really, really popular, very interesting past, and it's nice to talk about. This actually had a very interesting origin because as we all know, the most traditional boss fight is usually you get to the end of the level or the end of the game, there he is, he's been the villain, he's shaped up, it's the most difficult fight probably in the game, and it's all come down to this, it's like this, you defeat him, you win. Basically, that's the whole thing about a boss fight. So if you had to take a wild guess, how do you think boss fights started in video games? What kind of was the thing that said, "Oh, this is a cool thing. Let's start doing it." What?
Doom. I'm going Doom.
Doom.
Fair enough.
It's a little bit new, unfortunately.
I kind of like the Skyrim franchise. I mean, actual Skyrim. And there were regular bosses and everything. So
okay. Let me put it this way. I actually didn't mean a game that started boss fights. I kind of thought where do you think? How do you think the idea of a boss fight came? Do you think someone was sitting in a meeting and said, "Ooh, we need a way to make it harder for the What do you think was the initial light bulb moment?
I think somebody just made someone to fight too hard.
Yeah,
That's a good,
pretty much.
it's a good guess. Unfortunately, it was a very out of the box thing that started boss fights. You're not gonna believe this, but it was Bruce Lee, the Mr. Bruce Lee. Yes, that Bruce
He was
Lee.
a boss fight.
Well,
Yeah,
kind
it
of.
was,
What happened
yeah.
was
It
Bruce
was.
Lee made two movies in 1971 and 1972. And these two movies literally were something kind of new and cool because Bruce Lee was fighting all these, ninjas and kung fu masters and, warriors and samurais and stuff. And then in the movie, he gets to the end and it had this menacing cinematic of this big guy coming towards him. He was the boss of the organization of the samurai, of the ninjas and stuff. And Bruce Lee squared off against them and it was and they started hitting each other. Big fight, Bruce Lee won, and kind of the movie ended. And it happened in two movies like that. And someone had the light bulb idea of, hey, that's not a bad idea for games. And genuinely, that's kind of how it started and how it's carried on. Because you're gonna realize this in the whole podcast, but boss fights were entirely made from start to end, all of it, by Asian gaming companies. Not a single little bit of it was developed by the West. No, not a single bit. You could even go more specific. Almost everything was developed by Japanese game developers. But we'll get to
Yeah,
that.
that's, yeah.
So, yeah, as I said, light bulb
Very
moment.
common in that time,
Bruce Lee
yeah.
had a few kung fu fights. Faced off the big boss. And, yeah, we saw it in a little bit of stuff, I'd say Dungeons and Dragons. First game really to have it. But we all know Dungeons and Dragons. That's kind of like a board game. The whole premise of Dungeons and Dragons is having this character storytelling where, like, you are playing along, with your party of people, and you're coming up against these fights, you roll, and maybe something like cool happens or something bad happens to you. That's the whole premise kind of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, that was those two martial art movies that kind of really set things in motion. And all of the features you can imagine in boss fights. Let's actually ask that quickly. What do you like about boss fights? Like, what do you expect to see in boss fights? Like, what is, like, kind of telling things for you that it's a boss fight?
Cinematic first.
So a cutscene almost, yeah?
Yeah, like a cutscene cinematic, something to be like, oh shit, it's the boss.
Yes.
And then after that,
yeah,
you walk into a room. It's usually a room.
Yeah.
And then somebody fucks the shit out of you like 100 times before you actually get it right.
Yeah, so like it's kind of like it's meant to like be difficult. You need to like think properly about what you're doing. You can't just like do anything and expect it to work.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
And you have to use everything that you've gathered throughout the whole game to kill the boss.
Basically, he's like, it's all come down to this, right?
Yes.
Okay. Slow, you also had something.
Yeah, so for me, it's like, for a boss fight, like it's a lot more different than like your average fight that you've been like going through for the past like 20 plus hours or whatever.
Yeah.
And like with all those skills that you've unlocked and all the moves that you've unlocked, you can like finally put it to use. And like I feel like with like boss fights, you can take out your boss fight with or your opponent like with different moves or whatever.
Yeah.
And like try different things, which is pretty unique and cool.
That's also valid. Marty, do you have anything kind of that you always kind of expect to see when you go in a boss fight?
So, of course, we come to the stage where the boss actually transforms something more powerful than anticipated before the time. The recursion of that, so on and so on, and actually until you get him to a phase that
so boss phase, yes.
And just satisfaction of just actually ending him.
That's a pretty good point as well, because like a lot of boss fights do that, where like maybe you start off on he's like swinging his sword around, and then you damage him up to a certain point, and suddenly, oh my gosh, he can jump and he can like shoot arrows now, and it's kind of like now he's evolving.
It's just kind of progressive state.
Yeah. So now I'm going to blow your minds. I'm going to speed through this a little bit, but I'm just going to emphasize how literally anything you can imagine that happens in boss fights, or that like is typical of boss fights, or like any sort of scenario in a boss fight, all of it was developed in Japan. Almost everything. So I'm going to speed run through it, right? Sega released a game called Samurai in 1980. It was a martial arts action game, and you slash your way through many samurai swordsmen before finally confronting the more powerful, stronger boss samurai. There's your thing about, you walk into a room, it's a big guy, there's a cutscene, it's a kind of huge moment now, it's all come down to this. There's your first one. And this one, funny enough, was one of the ones that was actually directly inspired by the Bruce Lee movies afterwards. It's literally the source material for this game, which was kind of cool. Then SNK, another Japanese one, released Sasuke and Commander in 1980 as well. That is one of those shooting games, like one of those shooting games you do on the arcade, like that you walk around and you shoot stuff and you just have to survive. And again, you face a lot of ninjas in the beginning, grunts, just like easy opponents and stuff like that. And then you come against the boss who displays multiple attacks and patterns to his attack. He's not just sticking to one thing he's doing the whole time. He's mixing it up, he's kind of having all this kind of routine to try and catch you out. That's also what Slow was mentioning, about the He's not only doing one attack like a slash. Maybe he's doing a turn and a slash. Maybe he does a block, a counter. He's got a lot in his arsenal compared to just like what a normal enemy would. And then Hiroaka released Phoenix in 1980. That's a space shooter, like Space Invaders. Typical games like that, asteroids. All those ones are pew, 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 and I'm just shooting stuff. That is a level where a giant mothership appears that like is bigger than any of the other spaceships out there, and you have to shoot it down on specific points to win anything, like to make damage to it. You have to shoot it at specific weak points on the boss to do anything. Otherwise, if you shoot it anywhere else, it's invulnerable. Kind of reminds me of my ex, but yeah, that's one of those things. But again, another boss fight trope, right? Namco releases Galaga 1981, another space shooter, Space Invaders, and it was one of the first games to actually use the word boss. But not only that, regular enemies could suddenly, out of nowhere, become a boss. You maybe walk into a fight and you think, oh, it's one of those normal enemies, and then it was like, oh my gosh, it's a boss. He's been hiding this whole time. And yeah, it's just his attacks was so powerful that like outside of where you would take normal damage from other enemies, when the boss hits you, you instantly lost a life in this game. That's kind of to put the emphasis on you need to watch out for his attacks. Right?
Yeah.
IREM releases Kung Fu Master in 1984. Another inspiration directly from Bruce Lee's martial arts movies. And it popularized boss fights as... Now, all of these games I mentioned before, they had boss fights, but what should be important to note is while you were fighting the boss, you were still dealing with regular enemies. Like imagine a space shooter. There might have been a giant boss, but there were still like mini spaceships of enemies like floating around that you still had to shoot and stuff. To be careful of that. What Kung Fu Master and IREM did in 1984, it specialized in boss fights being one-on-one encounters. Again, Dylan, that's what you mentioned. You maybe walk into a room and there's a cutscene and there's a boss, but it's to emphasize this is mono and mono, like one-on-one. This is me and you, no one else here. Like we're finishing this now.
Yeah.
And yeah, this one actually was so popular because if you were in the first podcast, this was the game that I mentioned way back when. This was the first game that showed both your health meter and the boss's health meter. And obviously now the boss's health meter was a huge thing to intimidate you. This huge health meter that the boss had to intimidate you. But it was the first game to show both your health and the boss's health. And this was so popular, this game literally inspired Street Fighter, the entire series. Street Fighter. That's big. Yeah. What'd you say?
Ooh. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
No, I was just saying, yeah, it inspired Street Fighter, which is massive. I mean, that's an entire series of games that just spawned. I mean, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, all of those games kind of originated from this idea of you have a one-on-one fight and you can see both your health meter and the opponent's health meter, all from this whole boss fight scenario thing. And then finally, Sega releases Fantasy Zone in 1986. That was the first game to use something called a boss rush. Now, that's kind of a weird term. We don't know it all that well, but basically a boss rush it's a kind of event or something where you literally face off against all the bosses you have defeated before. Like maybe say you've gone through every level in the game, and every time you've defeated a boss at the end of the level, but now at the end of the game, you have to face all of them again, all over, and like, oh my gosh, they're all here! How the hell am I going to do this? So
I did that in Zelda.
Zelda does that. I know Zelda does that. And again, inspiration of that.
But it makes it more fun.
Yeah. So as I just said, explained in this timeline, that is about 6 years, right? I'm talking about 6 years, from 1980 to 1986. 6 years worth of stuff. And literally the Japanese wrote the entire textbook of boss fights in those 6 years. They just said, this is literally everything you can imagine in boss fights. Use it, we've written it all. We know what we're doing and all of that. So that's kind of insane. You don't see this regularly, but yeah. What was limiting here, of course, is, as I mentioned with these games, it's the medium they played on. So you played the boss fights, but it was all of these were arcade games. Now, the thing with arcade games is, obviously, you don't play an arcade game at home. You go to an arcade to play it, right?
You
So
get
the thing is, you can't put a really meaty, narrative-driven story or something in an arcade game because no one's gonna go to the arcade. You know, play on the arcade machine. You tell a nice story, and then we're like, "Oh, I've run out of quarters. I'll just come play the rest of the game tomorrow." No, you can't. You can't do that as a business. That's just not gonna work. So arcade games were supposed to be this like sweet and short adventure. You know, not really much of a care for story. It's kind of just like, you know, you kind of just having fun
Pac-Man.
blasting spaceships and stuff. So yeah, and the bosses were kind of just a mechanism for getting a high score. That's pretty much it. That's how they treated bosses back then. But yeah, there was quite a lot of shifts forward. But before we go to that, if we had to talk about it, because there are quite a few famous examples, and I would love to hear way more or less like, because what you're going to say is probably going to give away what you played back then. But if you had to think of your favorite arcade video game boss of all time, so we're talking about like literally just the big boss at the end of an arcade game, which one do you think is your favorite? Now you have to think about what arcade games you played. Nah.
I mean, the only arcade games I really played was Pac-Man and Donkey Kong.
That's a very good example you got there.
So yeah, I'd say Donkey Kong because Pac-Man, I never really got to any boss fights.
I don't think Pac-Man had boss fights. I pretty much just those 4 ghosts always.
Yeah, I feel like Donkey Kong, it was just a constant boss fight.
Yeah, because that is literally a concept. About the other two of you, you got any like standout boss fights for you in arcades? Someone's PlayStation
Helicopter.
dying. I heard a PlayStation dying there.
Yeah, that was mine. My bad.
No stress. You were gonna say something?
Yeah, I didn't really play much arcade games. I wasn't like interested in them. I think I was just like interested in like the PS2 era, and just like the simplicity of.
No, I'm gonna be honest. Like, it is kind of a loaded question because I mean, it is kind of difficult to look back on the arcade era and think of like bosses. Like most of the time, we just don't even remember the games. We just remember playing in the arcade. So.
I feel like the only boss that I really ran into was like those guys with the high scores. I was like, oh, dude, I gotta beat these in like 2 cents, whatever.
Or if you don't beat them, you like make your name something offensive, so it like looks at the bottom and it says like Dylan, and then the guy in second place sucks.
G.
Marty?
Yeah, that's good.
Marty, how about you? You got a boss you got in mind, or?
Not really.
I do like Dylan's example though about Donkey Kong. That was a pretty significant boss because, as he said, the whole game was pretty much a boss fight. You know, he's rolling barrels down the staircase things, and you have to jump over the barrels, and you have to climb the ladders, and you have to dodge it, and then when you get to the top, you know, you defeat him and stuff, which, you know, is simple enough. But what Donkey Kong indirectly did was obviously it started the Mario series. Because the guy you were playing as was called Jumpman, and then his name changed to Mario.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the protagonist of the Donkey Kong games was Mario, because he saved Princess Peach at the end.
I know why he was a protagonist, but
yeah,
I didn't know he was called Jumpman.
He was called Jumpman because, yeah, he jumped over barrels, pretty much. But yeah, no, that's genuinely kind of indirectly what it did, but that's just kind of, you don't even sometimes foresee that the effects something like that could have. But that's pretty much, I would say, the most iconic arcade boss. I don't think there's anyone really quite as recognizable, quite as influential. I don't think really there was an honest other option there than Donkey Kong. But yeah, as I said, moving forward, arcade games kind of limited what bosses were, but there was something that kind of turned things around again. And that was obviously when we finally got the video game home console thing, the one you can physically have in your home, the machine that you can play your stuff in at home, which kind of gave the developers more liberties, because that means like they can put more time into the games. There's now a story they can play in the games, because the thing is, now the kid's rushing home from school or something, and he's like, he can't wait to turn his video game home console on and start playing the game and kind of beating the game and all that. It's like there could be more effort into the game because there's now a replayability to it, because people have the option now to sit at home and play the game that wasn't available before. So that kind of changed the game, pun intended. But yeah, that kind of changed the game for a lot of people, because now not only could bosses have narratives and they can contribute to the story and stuff, is that more genres could try out bosses, because more genres were literally being made by the minute at this point because of home things. So we're talking like RPG games, which we'll get to in a second, because I already know there's a huge RPG series that did boss fights. Platformers, shooters in the 90s like Doom, that you guys mentioned. Even rhythm games started to have boss fights. You had like that really difficult song in a rhythm game or a dancing game. Like you had a really difficult dance you had to do, and that's pretty much what bosses were. But again, like everyone could just try out the boss fights, which was cool because it was possible now.
Game just run.
What? What did you say about Genshin Impact?
Just gonna run a thought. Okay, so let's consider also Madden, the gauntlet mode.
That's another good point. Literally, like something like a sports game like Madden had that boss fight mode, which was just an insanely difficult level. But it was portrayed as a boss fight because, again, it's about difficulty. It's about like making you really think about what you want to do and how you want to beat it. That's kind of what it was like. So again,
I found the boss levels get progressively harder.
Yes, that's also true.
Yeah.
As you progress through, that game got harder. I remember that, because at the end of the day, they wanted to really take your skills to its limits and see how far you can go. But yeah, now with all this in mind, right? And with the idea that like a lot more genres could do bosses, and there was a lot more narrative you can craft to bosses, and there's a lot more innovation you can do for bosses, you'd think it would be safe to assume that literally anyone in America or the West would do anything with bosses whatsoever. But they didn't. At all. They didn't do anything at all at this point still. Because it was still the Japanese literally innovating everything after this point. Let's just look at like the late 80s and 90s here, right? The ability to play at home, it makes it the opportunity for video games to be more than just one-off experiences. There was replayability. And yeah, the thing is, like, now that you can play a game at home, imagine how you can have a whole series of games. Like in arcades, you wouldn't really have a series of games. There wasn't like for example, Pac-Man and then Pac-Man 2. They didn't do that because, I mean, there's no point in doing that. What's the point of having a Pac-Man 2? That's like, what else are you gonna do? So that wasn't really feasible back then. But so, for example, look at Super Mario Bros. We just talked about Mario. The whole series of Super Mario Bros. Is a long ass series. I mean, we started in the 80s with it, and we're still making Mario games. Like when now? You have Mario on your Switch, Dylan.
Yeah.
Do you?
I just had a 1v1 on Rocket League. That's the boss fight.
That's also a boss fight of sorts. Especially when you're in your high ranks. Nah.
Still gold 1-on-1s.
Oof. But anyway, yeah, so Super Mario Bros., long ass series. Everyone knows Super Mario and Luigi and all those characters at this point, and they had a lot of games in their repertoire. But again, as I mentioned, they're made by Nintendo, right? And of course, now that you're a game series, you could think about having recurring bosses in your games. It makes the boss fight more impactful, because now you have this boss that's been with you like every game, and he like every time he tries to like freaking like defeat you and stuff like that, and it makes him more impactful. So obviously we all know him. He's very famous. He's been almost in every single Mario game, even since the beginning. It's Bowser. There's very Bowser. The very few gaming moments really that sticks as well, or that kind of sits in your brain as much as that final boss fight with Bowser. If you were into the early games, like you defeat Bowser, he falls into the lava pit, and you save Princess Peach. That was like iconic because that was one of the first boss fights also on the video game console. And it sets the foundation of Bowser fights for decades, literally decades to come. And then people started their mind started going, it's like, yeah, we should maybe have a recurring boss in video games because that makes it way more impactful. So Sega did it with Dr. Eggman, in Sonic, with the Dr. Eggman one.
Mhm.
Mega Man did it in 1988. That had not only one big boss but a lot of mini bosses as well. So the people were starting to really catch on. But again, this is only Japanese developers. This is not the West. If you want to talk about a recurring boss, the first time ever, right? That the recurring boss fight or some sort of boss character in a Western game once it came, who would you guess did it? Who would you guess and when?
Saga?
Saga's. I'd say EA.
Possible.
Not EA, but I think it would be easier if you guessed the game rather than the people, because, yeah. It's a 90s game. It came from the 90s.
Do we all know it?
You do know it, but I don't think you know it's from the 90s.
That helps.
It's a platformer.
I don't know what that means.
That means it's one of those games where you have to jump on boxes and stuff, and you need to like a Mario. Mario is a platformer. Games that are like Mario or Sonic.
Are you talking about? I can't remember the name now. Typical. The one where. Fuck.
You play as an animal.
I know.
Dylan knows, but he can't remember it. Can any of you ever remember it?
No.
Not at all.
It's where you run around.
Oof, Dylan's about to unlock a memory. It was Crash Bandicoot.
That's the one.
Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot at the first. You remember Crash Bandicoot?
I was playing it 3 months ago.
Yeah, it's a good game. Still is a good game. But yeah, Crash Bandicoot did it in 1996, which sounds old, but it was 10 years later than Super Mario did it. 10 years after the East even invented and said, hey, this is a cool concept, and the West was like, yeah, we'll try it out at some point. They were not interested in this concept for whatever reason. It's almost non-existent. But yeah, it's even outside of that point, bosses also allowed games to elevate themselves. I think if you think about a game, a lot of the times, one good part about the game for you that you do remember sometimes is if it has a good boss fight, you're probably going to remember that boss fight because it made you probably work so hard to defeat him, or it was maybe a memorable cutscene, maybe it was narratively very impactful for you. It could have been your best friend that betrayed you and now he's your boss fight and you don't want to kill him, but you're like, oh, you betrayed me. Why?
Or I just didn't get to see Darth Vader in Star Wars because of frickin' this boss that I just couldn't defeat.
Yes, like Jedi Fallen Order. Poor thing. Poor thing.
I hate that boss.
Poor thing. But again, bosses elevate games, and there's a lot of proof in that. Take another Japanese developer, Square Enix, who makes the Final Fantasy series, right? I'm not sure if you guys have touched Final Fantasy ever before or not. I've played it literally once, and I think it's okay. Have you, Slow? You play a lot of JRPG games. Have you ever touched Final Fantasy?
I wanted to, but it's like an RPG game, right?
Yes.
Is it one of those games?
It's a turn-based one.
I don't know. I don't know what I feel about RPGs, man. I don't know. I haven't played any Final Fantasy games. I really want to give it a try.
it's interesting. I'll give it that. I just don't think it was my cup of tea back then, because it's a lot of, when I play RPG, it's hard to place for me. I like medieval RPG, but I don't like fantasy RPG. It's kind of for me a difficult line to describe. But like Skyrim's cool for me, and like a Lord of the Rings one would be cool for me. But if you like have this whole thing like about magic and like stuff like that, I would not like. A Harry Potter RPG is it's kind of there for me. I know it's coming out, but I'm still considering.
You don't have to. Don't worry. You can just download from my account.
It's probably that's also probably true. I know you're gonna get it. So anyway,
Of course I am.
Have you played Final Fantasy, Marty? I'm gonna doubt highly, but you never know. No, I'm assuming. But anyway, yeah. So Final Fantasy, long ass game series again. This started in the 90s and is still going. Like Final Fantasy 15 was not too long ago. Final Fantasy 15 was like maybe 3-4 years ago. But the thing is, like, a lot of people know and a lot of people rank it as their best one, Final Fantasy 7. It's even got a remaster recently. Like, a lot of people out there say Final Fantasy 7 is the best one and their most favorite and all that. And a large part of that literally is because of the boss fight, Sephiroth, right? He was this really, really big boss swordsman. But it's not only that he was a swordsman and a boss and all that. It's how just effortlessly his strikes were, how well like he freaking tests you. It's a boss fight that kind of ticks all the boxes. And it was the simple things, but literally that boss fight is pretty much a huge reason why people consider Final Fantasy VII literally the best one out of all of them. It's just, it has that power over it because you do remember it. It sits in your brain the whole time. Like, for example, Dylan doesn't like that Fallen Order game anymore because he couldn't see Darth Vader. He's like, that damn boss fight!
Yeah. I just couldn't finish the boss fight now. I never want to play the game again.
Exactly. You see what I mean?
Yes.
That's the power of boss fights. Literally, it can make or break a game for you at points. And, you know, another example of a cool boss fight that started in the late 80s and 90s, this one Dylan might actually know, depending on which Zelda you played, because I don't actually remember. But you remember some boss fights sometimes like to play with the concept of there's an evil version of yourself out there. Like, or maybe an evil twin, but also just an evil version of yourself. So, that is another Legend of Zelda one. There's a Legend of Zelda innovation made by Nintendo, but Dark Link, obviously, is a boss that sometimes comes in, I think, Zelda games. Am I speaking facts here, Dylan?
Yeah, I know. You are, yes.
I know Dark Link, a lot of people like Dark Link. There's Ganon. I think that one people like a lot. And then there's Dark Link. I think those are the two favorite Zelda bosses. I can't be too sure because I haven't played it. But Ganon and Dark Link are like bosses in the very, very appraised Zelda games like Ocarina of Time. Both of them are in Ocarina of Time and people love Ocarina of Time. I know that for a fact. So it matters to a lot of people, you know, like these bosses and their boss fights. They like the characters themselves just carry a lot of weight. And you know, another cool concept, what about secret bosses? Sometimes games had secret bosses you could unlock, you know, for doing maybe silly stuff or maybe just going through the effort of 100% completing the game, you know, triggering secret events. That's another Japanese invention. And that was actually done by Capcom in Street Fighter 2, where if you had basically 3 perfect rounds, so perfect round obviously is Street Fighter or Tekken and stuff, that means literally you took no damage and defeated someone. So if you had 3 perfect rounds in a row, and you used the correct super moves and stuff, you would spawn Akuma, which is like a final boss type of thing. Just a cool little concept. Like maybe you did go through the effort and literally like flawlessly freaking beat everyone up and did everything correct, and now you're like, yeah, congratulations, now there's a big boss to come frick you up. Basically.
Wow.
It's kind of a crappy reward, but I guess that's kind of the reward you were looking for. A challenge.
Yeah.
Or, you know, my favorite type of boss fights, and this is a series that I know that I know Slow is a fan of. You know, boss fights that kind of are so radical and kind of out of the box, kind of insane, that you just didn't really like think like, how the hell did that happen? But Metal Gear Solid, right, developed by Konami, actually had probably one of the coolest out of this world boss fights ever.
True.
Do you know Psycho Mantis by any chance, though?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Do you remember what you had to do during the boss fight?
Yeah. So Psycho Mantis would take control of your controller and would be able to read your memory card.
Yes.
And you could like change slots and all that. Oh, dude, that's such a classic.
Yes, that was true what Sly said. You literally, Psycho Mantis in his boss fight would disable your controller, so you had to plug it out of the one USB and plug it into the other USB to keep fighting him because your controller wouldn't work anymore. He would not only do that, but he would read your memory card and could be able to tell what games you've played before. So like, stupid example, but of like, if you played Legend of Zelda, right? He could tell you, I see you like RPG games. He could literally do that. And
wow.
Like literally he even at some point messed with the color settings, the color grading on the TV, so it went like purple and green and the boss was like, oh, what's going on? And then you actually just go in your input settings and change the TV. It was a really wacky boss fight, but I mean it's cool because who else has done that?
No one.
Exactly. And you can like put your name on that and say, I've got the weirdest boss fight out there. But again, they just tried something new, and Psycho Mantis is loved by the Metal Gear Solid fans, by boss fight fans in general. Psycho Mantis really was a pretty sweet boss. And I've never I'm genuinely mind boggled at this point. Like I've never seen a mechanic from gaming so dominated by like one group of people. Freaking Japanese just doing everything at this point. Like they literally carried away like, I'll do it all myself, it's fine. You don't wanna help me innovate stuff, fine, I'll just do everything. But yeah.
They were the person in the group.
The group project, yeah. The one who just they told me, you can put your name on it, but I'm gonna go do everything. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
But okay, I do not wanna go here and slander and discredit Western games. Some of them did have cool boss fights, and some of them did have cool concepts for boss fights, okay? We're not gonna sit here and pretend that's not true. And again, we're gonna get to Doom. Obviously, you had to expect Doom was gonna be on this list, but Doom was a Western game, and that was made in 1993, and that had a pretty famous example of a boss fight called the Cyber Demon, But that boss fight actually did something interesting. It's not what happened during the boss fight or what you did during the boss fight, but it was what you were not supposed to do during the boss fight. Officially, one of the first boss fights ever to have an exploit. You could cheese the boss fight. Was the Doom one in 1993.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of something that started something really interesting, because that's kind of now opened up a whole nother can of worms, for players. And I'm pretty sure each and every one of you here has tried to or has successfully cheesed the boss fight. I know you have tried to.
I sometimes God of War ones.
Have you cheesed God of War ones?
Well, not really, but sometimes kind of not duplicated, but I don't know how. But there's some type of ores or whatever in God of War, and you know the Frost Golems?
Yes.
So you just run about throwing that other haze things or whatever, I don't know what it's called. But allocates total damage, but sometimes the thing actually glitch and just spit out like 3 of them instead of just returning 1. Well, it's not really.
But these are the old God of War games, or the 2018 one? Because I can't remember the orbs now.
2018.
Maybe I played God of War too long ago.
Only boss fight I can think of that I've cheesed was in Destiny 2.
Oh gosh, which one did you go and freaking? Oh, I know which one you cheesed.
There's a few.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure. Okay, fine. Using 1,000 voices on a boss is automatically cheesing it. I'm gonna say it now, because I swear you and Vincent just using 1,000 voices and hitting the freaking boss's head was unfair.
Okay, that doesn't count as cheesing because that's a gun that's in the game. You're allowed to do that.
Fine.
It was getting 1,000 voices that we cheesed.
Yes, that's also true.
There was that one, and then there was the cave that we had to do everyone like 3 times a week.
The Pit of Heresy one. Ah, yes. Destiny's a
Yeah, we cheesed
grindy
that
game.
What else did we choose? There was other bosses we choose. There was the other raid boss that you just had to like run in a certain direction, and you could choose a boss that way. Yeah, because he would like, you're like,
yes, because then he like follows you with his line of fire, but it doesn't actually damage you.
yes.
I think I remember this boss. Well, Mr. Slow, you've also been platinuming games a lot, including God of War, so I'm sure you've cheesed a few bosses. Surely.
Yeah. So back in the PS2 era, when I got the MGS3, Metal Gear Solid 3, there was this boss called The End, which he was just like lay in a corner or just snipe. And there were actually 3 ways to take him out, which were pretty creative for a game that came out in 2004. There was one way where you can take him out legitimately, like just have a full-on sniper duel.
Yeah.
Or there's like an early case in the game where you see him and also the main antagonist, Colonel Volgin. They have like a whole meetup. God like drags him out in a wheelchair, and you have like this slight window once the cutscene ends to take him out. And Major Zero, who's helping you along the mission, will be like, "Wait, you just took out The End. How did you do that?" And then a Big Boss is just like, "Well, you know, I'm just that good, bro." And then there's a third way.
Skilled.
Yeah, and then there's a third way where you could go out of the game, and then I think you had to wait like a week, or I think you could change the date or the time, like 7 days ahead, and then you go back into the game, and then you would find The End like just dead. Like he just died of old age. It was so fucking crazy, man. It was insane.
Metal Gear. Trust Metal Gear to like be so time based.
Yeah.
That just made me think. You know, it'd be a great way to choose a boss fight that would be like an Easter egg, but like legit, but quite cool.
Yes.
If you rock up to a boss fight, and your the like boss basically like looks at your sword, and the sword like so coolly respects you or whatever. Like it is your sword that you've got. You had to get in ways that you so you respect it so much that you like it down as well.
That would be actually a cool like feature in the game.
Armin.
Yes.
Me and you have cheesed a boss fight before.
Which one?
So remember Disney Universe?
Oh gosh, now I have to remember really hard, but yes.
Okay, so basically we're one of the final missions, and you unlock a character every time you actually defeat the boss.
Oh yeah.
So instead of actually defeating the boss and getting the pulley lever to you to actually get a package, you just
jump for the character and then it ends the boss fight. I remember now, because you can jump on the top of each other's heads. So we just gave each other a boost, got the character, and it ends the boss fight. Yeah. I actually remember now. Basically, the boss fight was like this. Like the character, like let's say Jack Sparrow is like trapped in a cage, and he's like, "Oh, help me!" And then like your point is you need to defeat the boss so that the cage lowers and Jack Sparrow can get out. But the point is pretty much the game like just picks up if you touch Jack Sparrow, it means you've obviously succeeded because now like you've like touched him. So all we did is I gave Marty or he gave me a boost, we jumped on each other's heads, and then we just like touched Jack Sparrow in the air, and then the boss fight just ends because they feel like, yeah, you did it. I actually remember that. That was a good ass memory. But yeah, I was thinking of even something simpler. Do you know the wither in Minecraft?
Yeah.
If you spawn it in a hole, it dies.
Oh yeah.
That's I remember that was the thing.
Jason and I didn't spawn him in a hole, but we trapped it.
That's pretty much like the idea of like literally just putting him in kind of like a spot that like he just can't get out of. Literally was the thing. But yeah, it's exploits have been around like ever since it started. It's never stopped. That's the thing. Like And that presents a new challenge, I think, for developers, because now they're sitting there thinking about like, oh, we got to think about like how we want to do this boss fight, because like, what are the players gonna try and do to cheat this damn boss fight? Like, it adds a whole different like thing to think about. And I mean, you'd think it would be easier these days to try and like force players, to like don't cheat the boss fight, do it properly, right? They're still struggling with that. Like, so I don't know how well you guys followed Elden Ring, but Elden Ring, obviously, another Dark Souls-like game. It's really, really praised for its boss fights. It's one of those games that like, it's really, really also making like people cry about their PC requirements. But it's Elden Ring is really good with its boss fights, and one of its favorite boss fights is the guy called Radahn, right? Radahn is a really, really good boss fight. He starts off really slow. He's got a sword, huge sword. He swings, does a few arrows, attacks and stuff, and then I think if you get into half health, he kind of like jumps in the sky and disappears, and you think, oh, the boss fight's over. And he comes down as a literal meteorite and starts chucking stars at you. He becomes Starscourge Radahn. But
Jesus.
Funny enough, you can choose that boss fight because as I said, he jumps in the sky and he becomes a meteorite. But you were fighting on a cliffside, so what a lot of people started doing is they stood on the edge of the cliff. And then when he comes as a meteorite, he's like, because he's homing in on you, like he like home and tracks and homes into you. So what they do is they literally dodge or roll at the last second. So he flies past them and falls into the ocean and he dies.
Wow.
And that's how they cheese Radahn by half health. So people still struggle with this thing. Like at some point, like I just don't think you're gonna ever stop it. That's one of those things, like they have to accept there's going to be a way, people are going to figure it out. But the main part is you gave a good boss fight, okay? So don't worry too much about people cheating it. But it's just one of those funny things. But really the first real Western series of games like Doom, like I said, did it. And some people did it, but it's not been consistent. But the first real series of Western games and stuff and genres that consistently started implementing these boss fights would actually just be the RPG games. Like, they were more or less consistent with it in various ways, like the moving to the online part apparently is what kind of little sparked it a little bit, because Diablo started having boss fights when Diablo came around. You'd walk in around Diablo and you'd go into those dungeons and you'd find a really big scary boss and you're like, oh my gosh, this thing is huge, look at his health, look at that ugly ass thing. I remember I was so scared of Diablo. I don't know how old I was, but I remember in Diablo 2 I was like walking around on the computer. I didn't really know what to do at that point because I've not played it too much. And I remember walking in a room or something, and there's this spider woman with like the big titties, and she's walking around like attacking. I was like, what the frig is this thing? He was an ugly ass boss. I think that was Diablo 2 or something. But that was an ugly boss. But it was kind of the RPGs moving to the online front that kind of gave Western a little bit of a push and a shove to start trying to put boss fights in. And it's a different component as well, because that's also now, as Dylan mentioned as well, with the online and RPG games, that allows like cooperation in boss fights, because you're not like facing the boss alone. You're probably facing it with your party of people, multiple people. Like Dylan mentioned in Destiny raids, it was like 6 of us taking on the boss. It wasn't just one. If you were one trying to take on a raid boss, you were a madman. But yeah, there were 6 of us. You were 6 of us doing a raid. Or even, remember Elder Scrolls Online? There were tons of bosses in Elder Scrolls Online. And then like 3 or 4 of us go in a dungeon, and we try to fight the boss, and you had to go through its attack phases and weaken it and stuff like that. And this whole concept of like working together to fight the boss and all of us having different roles spawned a pretty much really kind of popular thing for MMORPG these days. You'd either be a tank, a DMG damage dealer, or a healer. That's pretty much like where this concept came from this whole thing of online and RPGs doing boss fights in Western games. And obviously that's been everywhere. I think Dota does that, Diablo does that, ESO does that, Destiny as well, like Wizard, Titans, and Hunters. It's pretty much DMG, tank, and heal. That's pretty much what they are. So that's
I'm always the healer.
I know, you're the wizard, so you were always having those healing circles. And technically, I was supposed to be the tank, but you would always drag me into boss fights that I'm way not leveled up to, so I was pretty much useless as a tank. And then Vincent, would like spam his attacks. Sean would spam his attacks because they were hunters. And yeah.
Yeah. And then I'd heal everyone.
And you'd heal everyone with a healing circle. And then
I'd heal everyone.
Yeah. Wait, what?
I'd heal everyone and be confused because I didn't know where I was going.
I didn't know what to do in general, and then we always get killed. Like, oh my gosh, he's gonna kill all of us! And he just kills. And then yeah, there was again, like as the decades rolled on, there was a next major shift in boss fights. We will look again at a game Shenmue in 1999. This game I discussed a tiny bit in the open world podcast. I talked about in the open world podcast. I talked about this was a game that really reinvented the open world a little bit. NPCs had schedules. They went to bed. They were going places. They were actually doing stuff, not just standing around waiting for you to talk to them or something like that. Like they actually felt like they had an actual life. Inside of the game and stuff like that. So this game did that pretty well. That's one of the first games that really did that. But the other thing I mentioned briefly in that podcast was quick time events, right? Now, for some reason, this became super. Shenmue didn't use it for this, but for some reason, this concept became super popular in the 2000s. So much so that even the Western games started doing it almost everywhere. Now, you know what a quick time event is. I'm pretty sure you guys all know what a quick time event is. It's those things like you're doing a boss fight and it's like, oh, press quickly, triangle, oh, X, oh, circle. It's just like try to be fast about it. Pretty much that's the whole thing. And I'm talking about every game had it. Tomb Raider had it. If you play the Lara Croft Tomb Raider games, they had quick time events, not just for boss fight, but literally for slipping off of an ice cave and you had to press circle, otherwise you fell forced to a bloody death. Tomb Raider had it everywhere. The old God of War series, the new one kind of a little bit, but the old God of War series had so many quick time events.
Wait, did the new one have it?
Maybe this. I think one or two, but small. If I'm not wrong, I could be wrong, but I think
That's
But yeah, God of War, the old ones had a lot of quick time events, especially if it's bosses. If you weaken them and they come into a state of weakening, the whole thing is you do a lot of damage to them by doing quick time events. And there was another boss fight with Aphrodite, which also had a quick time event, but I won't discuss that one on podcast because we're family friendly. But that was my favorite quick time event. You'd go on Aphrodite because it's a sex scene, and she's laying down in bed take me, Kratos, and you press circle on her, and the screen moves away because obviously they can't show sex on a video game, but they move the screen away from her, so you watch the two lesbian friends, you just watch their faces as these they're reacting to your performance. And I remember the controls were my favorite. You start off normal controls circle and square, and the screen starts vibrating and you hear the lesbians go, oh, such a man, oh. And then they throw this line in when will it be our turn? Then my favorite controls, they start using the analog stick, but it's rotating in a circle like that. I'm thinking, did they imagine that's Kratos's, and that's what you're doing to Aphrodite? Was that the idea behind it? That was Kratos's joystick doing this in circles or something like that? And then if you do a good job, you just get woo celebration. You completed sex, I guess. So old God of War is golden.
Oh, damn it.
Games back in the day was so goofy, man.
Very. Old God of War is golden. If you haven't played it, really play it. It's so funny just to think about. Poor Marty now. He was thinking of Kratos' idol and stuff. Now he has to hear about rotating joysticks and balls.
Yeah, actually, I have experienced that before. Yeah, in old God of Wars on PS2.
Oh, guys, are you experienced rotating balls? What?
Yeah, kinda. It's a long story.
Okay, then. Well, we'll leave you to your.
Remember, I have stepbrothers.
Fetishes, but anyway, yeah. As I said, the going into the 2000s, yeah. Oh, okay. Going to the 2000s, quick time events literally was everywhere. Everyone popularized it. It was kind of used as a mechanism in boss fights. Like even games like Sly Cooper would use it. That was one of the first ones, and pretty much the Japanese were still at it, still innovating it because of these quick time events, because they did it so well. I mean, Resident Evil 4 has probably one of the best quick time event boss fights out there, because every like button press was part of the choreography. So it was like a knife fight or something, I think. And like every time you press the button, it syncs perfectly with the knife. So it goes like zoom, 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 and it works so well, and it doesn't like really interrupt with it. And that's kind of the drawback with QuickTime events. If it doesn't sync well and it doesn't work well with your game, QuickTime events feel cheap. And that's kind of where like you have to watch out. QuickTime events can feel cheap because let me think about a few. Dying Light had a crap boss fight. I don't know if you finished Dying Light, Dylan. Did you finish the campaign?
I did.
Do you remember the crap boss fights in the end with the QuickTime events?
Yeah.
That was a crap boss fight.
Yeah, I remember.
Like the machete. Like you pressed a few buttons and oh my gosh, all of a sudden he lost his arm or something. Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
10 out of 10. Shadow of Mordor. A freaking game. You know, Shadow of Mordor is a game about Sauron. Sauron! You fight Sauron in the end and you make it a quick time event. Why? What were you thinking? But like even like
Oh, that would have been
yeah.
a nice all-out war.
No, and then freaking even Halo and Call of Duty did quick time events for boss fights. I don't know why those games decided to have boss fights or quick time events, but anyway, I remember Call of Duty's one because the quick time event was literally cutting your arm off and Kevin Spacey fell in the fire. Very weird Call of Duty, but it was a funny one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it's better that Kevin Spacey falls in the fire nowadays, but oh well.
I remember Halo's quick time boss
That
fights
also had
were
one,
actually
actually.
not.
Halo 4 had one.
Yeah, and it wasn't actually that bad. I like that one.
Yeah, some of them, like I said, some of them are good, but not everyone's gonna like a quick time event because I said you do it wrong, or maybe you like don't do it too well, and people think it's cheap. But I think the worst one out of all of them, Shadow of Mordor is pretty much a close second for me. But the worst one out of all of them is if you've ever played the Batman Arkham series. I don't know if you've ever like touched that or something. Pretty good series.
Oh my god, bro.
Do you know the Batman versus Deathstroke boss fight?
Yeah.
That is one of the most depressing things I've ever seen in all of gaming. You have.
I mean, it's better than Arkham Knight. I'll say that.
Oh, the tank fight. Okay, I guess I can agree with that one. The tank fight was also pretty ass, but
yeah.
all I'm saying, right, is you have 80 years worth of comics, right? Maybe Deathstroke's not too old. I think Deathstroke was around in like the 1990s, but I'm telling you have 30 or 20 years worth of comics of Deathstroke versus Batman. You know, Deathstroke is always talked about in his comics as like he's a martial arts master. He can go hand to hand with Batman. You know, he's an assassin. He's the freaking deadliest guy on the planet. And you know, Batman, obviously, you give Batman prep time, he beats anyone. You know, freaking.
Yeah.
You have two huge guys here who you have actual source material for, and your literal boss fight is tapping a few buttons. Deathstroke loses his knife, and then you have to punch him a few times, and you do it like 3 times, and then he's defeated. What? What were you doing? Brother, how?
I mean, it could be worse.
I don't know how it could be worse.
This is like PowerPoint presentation, like cutscenes, and then it's like the buttons just show up randomly. It's like, oh yeah, press this before the timer runs out or something.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, do you guys like quick time events and boss fights? Like, have you ever felt like yes?
I don't think it changes it up from your casual fights, in my opinion.
Sure.
I don't.
You're so used to like smashing buttons, and then like it just like surprises you, like, oh, I gotta press this, and then if you miss it, you like, you lose HP or whatever.
I don't like it. I don't like stress.
I remember the only one. What about you, Marty?
What I actually experienced, I was on Destiny, so.
Destiny?
I mean, like quick time events.
Do we have quick time events in Destiny?
Yeah, well, not usually bosses, but in particular, like small events like defeating a small boss or whatever.
Marty, that's a public event, not a quick time event.
Public.
I
Okay,
think
so I had it
you're
wrong.
asleep, Marty.
Sorry, I haven't played this in like 2 years. So.
Marty, a quick time event is when you like are fighting someone in a game and like the screen tells you quickly press circle, and if you don't press circle, you die. Do you remember those boss fights?
Yeah, I understand.
Was Lego Star Wars.
Lego Star Wars also had one. Actually, there's like literal games, yeah?
Actually,
Huh?
Clean? What? What?
Clean?
I heard something about clean. I don't know what happened now. Mr.
I
Clean?
don't know.
Mr. Clean? All
yeah,
day?
sorry. No, sorry. Actually, Uncharted has quick time events.
Yes, Uncharted has some quick time events, although a lot of Uncharted quick time events was kind of the same as Lara Croft. Like, it would have sometimes random quick time events where, like, you fall and then you have to, like, quickly grab yourself or, like, do something to, like, save yourself.
Yeah, no, particularly in boss fights only, yeah.
But sometimes it does appear in boss fight, yes. That's true.
Oh,
especially older ones. The older ones were one of more of those, like, kind of typical boss fights where, like, the guy's sniping you and you have to crouch behind boxes and then weaken him and then, like, and hit a few buttons. Like, I think that's the first one. Drake's Fortune or something. Had that one. But it was a funny boss fight.
There was a funny one.
What the frick was that?
I was just in this Yakuza battle, I'm sorry.
I see. Anyway, I kind of think QuickTime events, like, I'm on the fence with both of them. I remember QuickTime events really, my first experience of QuickTime events outside of God of War, Kung Fu Panda had actually pretty good QuickTime events. But I think the entire boss fight was almost QuickTime events, but it was so fast that, like, it kind of felt more realistic because, I mean, it's Kung Fu, you, like, have to chain up moves and stuff like that. That kind of felt fine for me. I just remember, like, having to memorize those buttons on my screen was so stressful because, like, it was fast. It was so fast.
The only place I played Kung Fu Panda.
The Spur, and there's all those video games you could play.
Oh, the classic, bro.
Yeah, that's classic.
Shame. People will never know those days, huh?
Unfortunately.
Gen Z. But yeah, no, so some games... Wait, where am I in the script now? Oh, let's skip the page, you see. So, yeah, quick time events for me, you can use it, but I think you can just do a boss fight normally and pretty much have the same outcome. So, that's kind of what it is. But, you know, some games outside of quick time events, was there any boss fight really that, like, I talked about quick time events now because they kind of make or break boss fights as well, but boss fights in general, as I said, also make and break games. And now it's time to talk about the breaking parts. Which boss fight for you absolutely sucked in a game? Like, it sucked. I know Dylan's answer already. So maybe we get a different answer.
Fallen Order didn't suck. It was a good boss fight. I just couldn't do it.
You couldn't beat it. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's on me. That's the game's fault.
Anyone else with a sucky boss fight, like a really, really stinky, sucky one?
This whole idea is gonna suck. I mean, it's not the best game in all. But back when I was on PlayStation 2, there's a kind of Mickey Mouse game, and there's I think it was the second boss fight, but there's like this big chicken, and
You're playing Sasuke, so you're fighting cocks over here.
Yeah, cocks. Over cocks.
What is wrong with the boss fight now?
So there's anything technically wrong with it, but I mean I just couldn't do it.
Oh, so it was just too difficult for you at that stage. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Zelda Twilight Princess.
And a sucky boss fight.
No, so you do your final boss fight. You know when you like fight the boss that's a mixture of all the bosses, right?
Yes, the boss rush thing, yes.
Yeah, so you finish the boss rush and you're like, oh shit, yeah, game's finished. This is sick.
Yeah.
And then you walk outside and there's another boss. And the only way you can defeat this boss, I had to Google it, because the only way you can defeat this boss is basically by cheesing him, and that's it.
Wow. So you had to like cheat the boss to win. Oh,
Sucks.
Yeah.
that's kind of unfortunate. Slowly, I'm pretty sure you've played quite a lot of boss fight games since you like a Japanese one. So which one sucked? Sucky.
I wouldn't really say they sucked. I'll just say like it was like a challenge, especially in God of War when you had to take out like the final Valkyrie.
Yes.
Like it wasn't that bad, but like it was alright. You know, like if you get used to like her moves and her patterns, you can pretty much like predict it.
Okay.
I wouldn't say like anything's painful or whatever.
What's a Fire Realm? What's it called? Fire Realm.
Final round.
Yeah. When you get start to access other realms. What do you call it? Another tree that they say to another dimension. Not dimensions.
Which game are you talking about?
God of War.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. Oh, you mean the Muspelheim trials?
Yeah, Muspelheim. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, that Valkyrie in particular was bad.
I know I gave up on the Valkyries.
All you have to do is just spam your Runix attacks, and then you should be good, man.
And that's why I ended up
Cheese it.
I'm trying to think of boss fights that I kind of found sucky. Why when I talk about this in a podcast it doesn't come to mind? It's kind of disappointing. I can't remember now. I actually genuinely can't remember. I can't think of a single boss fight that like. There has to be one that I found bad. Man, come on. I know, like. Trying to think. I'm pretty sure there was one that disappointed me, but I can't come to mind now. Oh well. I'll just assume. But yes.
There was a disappointing boss fight in Elder Scrolls Online.
Which one?
It's the Vampire Quest, the end boss on the Vampire Quest.
Oh, I didn't do the Vampire Quest. I remember you and Natsika did.
Natsika is a...
Oh, werewolf. You were werewolf.
Yeah.
So the vampire was just easy, or just like the nothing boss?
Yeah, it was too easy. It was like, you're supposed to be a vampire.
Yeah.
I'm still a human.
Yes.
I don't know if I actually put this into consideration, but you did tell me one time that Black Ops 3's campaign sucked, and the final boss of that shadow thing.
Black Ops 3's campaign, I don't think I finished, but I just didn't find it interesting.
Yeah.
That was mostly it. There was one boss fight in it, but like I thought that one was kind of cool because you like melted her face. So I wouldn't like say that boss fight was bad. That was a pretty nice boss fight. I literally just can't think of anything right now. I don't know why it's not coming to mind. Oh well. John's lost. It's fine. But yeah, so some games did continue with boss fights after the 2000s. Like I think the craze for boss fights started to wear out a little bit, especially like again in the West, because they were kind of at this point approaching a thing like they wanted to tell more story. They wanted to do more storytelling, but not just storytelling, a more realistic storytelling. The West, when it comes to games, most of the Western games like realistic stories, grounded stories, and all that. They're not particularly keen on a lot of the times to go out of like the ordinary. Even when you think about your fantasy or like post-apocalyptic and stuff like that, almost all those games have realistic or like grounded settings. It's kind of like what the West is doing, and they kind of lost interest after a while in boss fights. They kind of went for more. This is realistically what would happen at the end of the game. For example, think about like random game. Think about Last of Us, right? Last of Us was a pretty recent-ish game of the West, a post-apocalyptic setting. You'd think about zombies and stuff, and you'd think, oh, there's zombies and infected people and stuff. Like, you could pretty much go crazy with a boss fight or something. And yeah, there was that big boss, like the bloater, for example. You could kind of count that, I guess, as a boss fight. But you'd think, like, at the end, maybe, oh my gosh, there's going to be, like, this big mutant zombie and, like, or some big, boss human, because at that point, the Fireflies were kidnapping Ellie and stuff like that. So, like, you'd think, oh my gosh, there's gonna be a big shadow or a big thing. But, like, the end of Last of Us was literally just like us escaping the place, walking out. That was the end. Because that was the end of the story.
Joel fucking shit up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's freaking, like I said, that was just the Western had this kind of thing like, okay, we'll just go for something more realistic. And finding a big dude at the end of the game is not realistic for us anymore. We want to tell nice narratives and want to end it in a nice way. So that's what they kind of went for that. The East, or Japan and stuff like that, they were pretty much still going strong at this point with their boss fights. And I mean, they're not doing badly. We're talking about Final Fantasy still doing it, They had Final Fantasy 15, they're still doing it. Yakuza, Slow is playing Yakuza right now. You can tell me there's boss fights in that game. Metal Gear Solid.
Oh, yeah.
Metal Gear Solid also still does boss fights quite a bit. And I mean, freaking Metal Gear in general, I mean, Senator Armstrong, like, for some reason this year, people started to discover or rediscover Metal Gear, Rising? Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. I think that's its name.
Yeah.
So people randomly discovered this game again this year, and then everyone found out about Senator Armstrong, which is probably arguably one of the most whack, funny, best boss fights out there, unironically. And it's just the best of all the worlds, when it comes to boss fights. It has quick time events, it has funny and cool dialogue, it has really good cutscenes and cinematography. It's a big boss, like a big muscular dude, and this is everything that the game has come down to. It's like literally everything that Japan has been putting up to this point and like developing up to this point and innovating up to this point, putting into one boss fight, and it's like the quintessential boss fight. They really, really did well with a few of those, but I think Senator Armstrong stands out, and I'm not just saying that for the memes. He's really actually a good boss fight, a really good one. But yeah, in the modern times, obviously, as I mentioned a little bit before, there has been obviously one developer, another Japanese developer, because who else? There's another Japanese developer that did really... do you like my hands?
Hideo Kojima.
Dylan likes my hand movements. I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation here. But anyway, yeah, so really I'm pretty sure you guys can guess it. There's a Japanese developer that's been, in the modern times, literally the master when it comes to boss fights. The absolute master.
Hideo Kojima. I'm just kidding.
He had boss fights in Death Stranding. Remember the whale?
Yeah.
That was a good boss fight.
That was the
Death Stranding had boss fights.
Yeah.
Death Stranding. The whale was the first boss fight I got to, and I didn't go past it.
No, Death Stranding had good boss fights. The whale was a really good one. And I think some BTs were also boss fights. And then you had what's the villain's name again?
Higgs.
Higgs, yes, Higgs was also a boss fight in the end. That was a human technically controlling the BTs. Death Stranding had a lot of boss fights. They had the lion. That's the one I'm thinking about. The lion that went invisible. That was a scary boss fight. That was like in chapter 4.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5.
Yeah,
the
chapter
lion
5.
that like went invisible, then it stalks you, but you can see its like paws in the ground, like because you can see its footprints. That was a scary boss fight because it stalked you really well. The whale was more just of a damage boss fight. That was the final one because it was like flying through the sky and stuff, and like it was kind of like just watch out for its attack. It's like the Ender Dragon, where the Ender Dragon is like you can see the Ender Dragon at all times, you know where it is, and you can damage it, but like once it attacks, just get out of its way. Just get out of its way. Otherwise it's going to kill you. So, but it was really good boss fights by Death Stranding. But no, it's not Hideo Kojima. There's really a standout developer when it comes to boss fights. So much so that their boss fights literally started a new genre. Literally. Yes.
That's crazy.
It's
That's
literally.
crazy.
You have to know it. Come on, man. These games are, well, they're not too. They're new. Like the last 10 years or so, we've seen a lot of these games.
Yeah, like I'm gonna say like I don't know who he is, and then as soon as you say it, I'm gonna be like, oh, I know the guy.
Well, not a guy. It's a studio.
Oh,
Think of like which boss fights these days are talked about all the time.
Boss fights talked about all the time.
Or just like the games themselves are talked about all the time, pretty much because of their bosses. Bosses plural, because there are many in each game.
I have no idea, man.
People have broken keyboards and controllers over these bosses.
The only thing that comes to mind is Elden Ring, or like the Dark Souls franchise.
Bingo. Well done.
Oh, okay.
From Software has been the master for like the last 10 years when it comes to boss fights, because their boss fight design is so damn good. Yes.
Who developed Sekiro?
From Software.
Oh, okay.
They did Dark Souls, they did Sekiro, they did Bloodborne, they did Soulsborne, they did Elden Ring. They've been doing boss fights for the last 10 years like no one else, and they're damn good at it. Because they just did just enough, all these other inventions, apart from like the boss fights being insanely difficult. You know, a lot of people will tell you that. Oh, Dark Souls, these boss fights are so damn difficult. You need to like be a master at the craft, just get good, you know, fight boss fights. But like so many of them are memorable. You know, I talked about Radahn. Radahn's really, really memorable for that thing of chucking literal stars at you. Then, obviously, I think its name is Allweiler and Stun or something. That's like from a Dark Souls one, where like it's two bosses you face. One is super, super fast, and the other one's a really heavy attacker. But the moment you kill one of them, the other guy just goes Super Saiyan and ape. So it was kind of like, that was a fun boss fight as well. There's that lady in the veil or something from Dark Souls 3 that does those like swinging attacks with her stuff. That was a really good boss fight. There's I can't remember the king's name in Dark Souls 3 again, but like he was also a really good boss fight. Then there's that monkey in Sekiro. I'm not being racist, there's a monkey in Sekiro that you have to fight. But anyway, he's like, Sekiro had this like really other cool thing about it where it was a lot of the boss fights also in Dark Souls are red herring boss fights. When I say red herring boss fights is you think it's over, like Dylan also mentioned it with the boss rush one. You think a boss fight's over, and then like it's not over because all of a sudden like something happens. And again, From Software is really good at doing this. They did it with Radahn, you know, with a red herring. But my favorite one was the monkey one in Sekiro, because like you literally have this cutscene, like where it looks like a King Kong monkey and stuff, and you literally have this cutscene where like you go up to the character and you freaking decapitate him, right? Falls on his knees, he's dead on the floor like that, and you think like, oh my gosh, the boss fight's over. And the moment you pick up your controller and walk away, you literally watch this corpse from the monkey rise up. He puts his head back on and he gets half his health back. And he's like, let's go, let's freaking go. And you crapped your pants, you're like, no.
I hate when that happens.
No, so masters, really just masters of their craft when it comes to boss fights. Freaking From Software, they've been doing it so well. Pretty much no one's been doing it. That's when it comes down to. They've just been doing it so well. It's like they've just been really, really good about it. But yeah, that's kind of the interesting position we're in now. You know, the West kind of said, we're over boss fights. Some people still do it, but the general consensus is the West is focused more on narratives, focused more on realistic games, grounded settings. They kind of just want to tell a story. They're here to tell a story and then finish the story. They're not really here to have a big antagonist that like has to have a big boss fight at the end. The East kind of is on the other side of the spectrum. There's a lot of the times the East is still about like, here's all the boss fights, or here's who you need to take down to get to the end level guy. But they do it really well. I don't want to discredit them. They do it really well. I mean, the Yakuza series are fun. Final Fantasy is fun. The From Software people I'm talking about is fun. Like, there's a lot of also really deep storytelling there, but they do it through their bosses. It's just a different approach they do. There are no one else has said. One of more two exceptions. The really big one from the West is Ghost of Tsushima. Really good game. Funny enough, ironically, it's set in Japan, which is funny. But again, just a really good game that's all about samurai fights and excellent storytelling. So, but yeah, that's kind of the interesting position we are now. And obviously, the games you play is going to determine if you play a lot of boss fights or not. So if you play, like, for example, if you play a lot of Western games like Last of Us or more story-based games and stuff like that, chances are you're not going to see a lot of boss fights in your games. But for example, if you go and play the Eastern games, the JRPG series and stuff like that, chances are you're going to see a lot of boss fights. Now, obviously, this will be based a little bit on what you play and stuff, but if you had to pick, do you still kind of see a place for boss fights in today's gaming?
I think it could work.
Would work,
Like,
but it depends on the story.
So you have to, like, the boss fight has to, like, work with the story. He has to be an antagonist. He has to, like, have some sort of narrative to it. It can't just be a boss fight to be a boss fight.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Marty?
I think Zelda does it well.
Zelda does it well. Zelda also does it pretty well because, like, a lot of its bosses are also recurring. That's the thing. Like, because at some point, like, if you see Ganon, you're like, oh my gosh, it's Ganon! He's here! Oh, I know Ganon! Or, like, freaking Darkling. Or I don't know who the other bosses are, but I'm pretty sure there's other bosses.
Yeah, it's like you go through the game and there's boss after boss after boss, but it's like it's always part of the story.
And that's a good
Like
point.
this boss is, yeah.
But it's true what you say. Like, a boss should really be part of the story because it gives them much more meaning. Like, when I defeat the boss, I'm like, yeah, freaking got you back. That's what you get for, like, kidnapping my sister. Frick you. But yeah, no, I think boss fights are also generally, they elevate games because it's different gameplay. You might, like, because the thing is, a boss fight really makes you think. The thing is, like, you can probably go through a game, and most of the time you, like, can go through the game messing around, doing your own thing and stuff like that. But then the boss fight comes, and then you have to, like, sit down and say, okay, now I've got to concentrate. Now I've got to focus because this matters. So it can really switch up, I think, the gameplay, which is also kind of cool for me. Like, for example, it wasn't necessarily like a really big thing, but the Batman bosses that were done right were done very well. For example, the Batman ones, like, relied a lot on you to use a particular part of the gameplay to do well in. So, for example, there was this one fight with, I think, Dr. Freeze or something. And you could not face Dr. Freeze head on. He would freeze you, obviously. So there's no way you can face him head on because he's just going to freeze you and then he wins. So you had to perfect your stealth. You had to perfect your stealth and, like, sneak attack him from behind and stuff, or, like, stun him and stuff like that. And then he adapted while you're doing it because you could sneak through vents to do that and, like, jump through the vents to, like, hit him. But, like, he would start freezing the vents, so you couldn't go through it anymore. So you had to think of another elaborate way to stealth attack him. But I like boss fights like that. They challenge you. They make you think. They make you focus. You gotta, pay attention to what you're actually doing.
Yeah.
Marty?
Yeah, I like those.
What's your boss fights? Do you want to see more boss fights?
Sorry?
Do you want to face another big titty lady or big cock in your boss fights?
Too many cocks. I mean, no more cocks.
No more cocks, eh? No more Mickey Mouse.
So you can't stop, man.
Yeah. Actually, no. But do you see boss fights? Do you want to see another boss fight in the games you play? Like, do you find it fun?
Yeah, I do, of course. And What everyone said is actually also made me more considerate of actual bosses and not just like acceptance of them just randomly showing up through games.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's pretty much our podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for my guests again for sitting here and learning and participating and yeah, just being good company. I hope you guys did learn something about boss fights, and I do thank you guys again for supporting all these wonderful things. It's generally fun to just research on these topics and bring it out to you. But again, yes, I hope you guys enjoy this for whenever you may watch this. Have a good day further, and we'll chat again next time, everyone. Goodbye.